Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Facts and Fallacies podcast. My name is Cameron English. Excited to be with you as always, joined by Dr. Liza Dunn.
Hello. How's everybody doing?
Well, I hope they're doing well. They can't answer you in real time, but the two of us, we hope you guys are doing well, that you have a great week, that you had a great Memorial Day. I'm going to use it as an excuse to barbecue with my friends, as I do most holidays, whatever the holiday is. That's how I celebrate it.
That sounds good. I'm actually flying out to California on Memorial Day.
Wow, how exciting.
I'm going to Sacramento.
Yeah, all right, lattes.
That's what I'm doing. So
Yeah, it's a nice part of the world. It surprises people when they come out here and we're not all just like crazy hippies doing drugs. They're like, oh, it's just, you guys are normal like most people. Yeah, they're like, yep. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I'm so sorry I missed last week. We had a little tornado in St. Louis.
You know, if there's one excuse that you could use to not show up for this show, it's my house might be wiped out by a tornado.
It was like literally 15 minutes before the podcast. So we finished the space and then the podcast was supposed to happen and blam.
Yeah. I can't imagine. That's one thing we don't get in California is tornadoes.
We get earthquakes.
Well, I mean, you can, but I haven't experienced a serious one in my 37 years here. So, yeah, I got the better end of that deal, I think. But anyways, enough about that. I'm glad you're safe and that your family is safe. I think I haven't heard any. Okay, that's good. So yeah, lots of property damage, but nobody that you know. I think hopefully.
That's right.
Good. Hallelujah. Okay, let's get into our show. Again, something a little bit different this week. The Make America Healthy Again Commission, chaired by our our dear friend Robert F. Kennedy Jr., put out its report last week, which is sort of a rundown of the public health challenges facing children in the country. And the strategy they seem to be going with is you have to address the problems affecting kids because as they grow up, they're going to turn into people who are sick and that need medical care. And so that's a good approach. They're trying to address things early in life. But of course, being chaired by RFK Jr., there were some oddities, to put it mildly, in this report. It wasn't, as we said on our space, it wasn't an absolute train wreck. There was clearly a derailment. There were some things in there that we're going to address that were troublesome, but it wasn't a complete and utter disaster. They actually made some good observations that were derived from some good science that I was happy to see. So we can go through some of those as the episode carries on. But maybe we could start with your first impressions, your overall takeaway after reading the report, Liza.
Yeah, well, I think that, a lot of this stuff, in many different circles, bipartisan circles, I think that there is a real concern about the health and well-being of children because there seems to be relatively good data that children are suffering from a variety of problems that they didn't do so much in the past. So there's an increasing level of anxiety that's being reported, an increasing level of problems in terms of mental health and overall well-being from that perspective. And there's definitely an increase in obesity and type 2 diabetes, and then that can lead on to knock-on diseases like cardiovascular disease and cancer and things like that. So there's the general concern that the public has about this, I think, is being reflected in this document. And I think this document is trying to trying to start the process for initiating a deep dive into what is at the root of this epidemic of chronic diseases in children. And there are some very well sort of positioned statements. Our children are more sedentary than ever. They are consuming more sugar than ever. Their portions are big and they're over consuming, and that's leading to real disease. I kind of like to think that, Gen X was sort of the last time we had the last great feral children kind of thing, where we ran around outside all the time, and didn't come back until dinner time. And so we were much more physically active. We didn't have screens. We didn't have cell phones. So we weren't just sitting and reading our cell phones for 9 hours at a time. And I think that all of those things play into why we're seeing the things that we are. And the obesity epidemic is not just confined to children. Adults are getting heavier as well. And then you can see that from the popularity of the, GLP-1 drugs. And prior to that, much more sort of significant interventions like lap bands and gastric bypasses and all sorts of things that people were doing. So big surgeries to try to decrease the obesity. And so there are a lot of things in there that I think are, pointing to a problem that needs to be addressed. Now, the real thing, though, is that you want to get to the root of the real problem and try to deal with that. If you get distracted by things that are very, very well researched, studied, well understood, have been on the market for decades, and are making claims that things like food coloring are at the root of the problem, I think you're missing the forest for the trees. And so my hope is that this will launch an investigation into things that you can invest taxpayer dollars into to help address this epidemic, rather than a wild goose chase that will waste a lot of taxpayer money on things that we know are not impacting children's health.
There's a lot that we're going to say about the mistakes in here, because there are a lot. I don't think they were as egregious as I anticipated they'd be, but we do need to break them down some. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about what they got right. And you already mentioned lack of physical activity. The other topic that they focus on, that we talked about at our space today as well, briefly, is screen time. And they're relying here on the research primarily. There's other research, but the primary researcher is Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist, neuroscientist, I think. He came to prominence a few years ago for writing a book called The Righteous Mind, where he talks about how ideology and belief can blind people to facts. So they're not really even in control. The analogy is you're on an elephant. You're on this elephant that's hard to control. And that's interesting stuff. But here they're pulling from his book, which is just a couple months old. It's called The Anxious Generation, and the statistics are really troubling here. So just a couple. So teens average nearly 9 hours of non-school screen time each day. Over 70% of children and 85% of teens fail to meet the federal guidelines for 60 minutes of daily moderate to vigorous physical activity. Nearly 80% of high school students do not sleep at least 8 hours, which has increased significantly. In 2009, 69% was that figure. Persistent sadness and hopelessness, goodness gracious, surged between 2011 and 2021. It's up to 42% now. With female students, suicidal ideation rising 58% from 19 to 30%. Goodness. So lots to get in there. But I'm reading Haidt's book right now with my wife because we have kids who they're still young, but they will be teenagers, overnight, effectively. It's what it feels like. Damn it. And what's concerning is this, it's starting to now, but it hasn't got nearly enough attention. And so some of the things that alarm me that Haidt talks about are, especially because I have a young daughter now, girls are spending so much time on Instagram and TikTok, and they are learning at a very young age that their physical appearance, their beauty, is their biggest, most important trait, right? This is what the world values about you, is how pretty you are. And the result is that at 9 or 10. They're starting to look at what kind of makeup should I wear? What kind of makeup should I buy? What does my favorite celebrity do, right? What kind of dresses does she wear? This kind of stuff.
And
And
at
what's
9 or 10, they're starting to look a little awkward,
yeah,
right?
it's
So it makes it worse.
it's really concerning. And what he talks about in the book for boys and girls is that as their focus goes on to these digital sources of entertainment, whether it's social media or video games or porn for young men, they're not developing the social skills that you need to interact. Not only they're not exercising, which has all of those negative externalities we've talked about before, they're not learning about how to function in the world. And in particular, what he talks about is that parents are so paranoid about what's going on in the real world, understandably in some cases, right? They're concerned about their child's safety, they're concerned about school shootings, they're concerned about drugs, all the things you should worry about, but they've walled off the world from their kids. And instead, they've let their kids go on the internet or go on social media. And it's this effectively unregulated world that your kids have access to. And a lot of bad stuff comes out of that. A lot like kids who spend more time on social media are more likely to be trafficked. They're more likely to be sexually abused. They're more likely to be taken advantage of. And because it happens under your roof very quietly without you knowing, very little happens about it. So it's very troubling. So I guess the takeaway for now is that I'm glad that a major government commission is looking at this and paying attention to it, because at minimum it's going to bring it to the focus of parents who need to do something about it.
Yeah, and I think that's all. Those are really, really important problems that you get with cell phones. On the flip side of that, cell phones do not cause ionizing radiation, and you are not going to get a brain tumor from it. Period. And so the claims that come from that same camp, and the thought that there's going to be, you know, there's going to have to be more research on that aspect of it, which is a real fundamental waste of money, to spend taxpayer money looking at that, because the question has been asked, it has been answered. They do not it's not ionizing radiation. So that is a little along the lines of the whole kind of chemtrails thing, right? So while these are all very reasonable, everything you mentioned, it's very reasonable to try to sort of evaluate that better, try to figure out how to come up with viable solutions to those problems. I think we need to figure out how to manage the anxiety that these children have, and making claims about, antidepressant drugs is not going to help that, right? We had some claims about antidepressant use on the space today, and the same group of people are raising all sorts of issues about antidepressant drugs and making claims that they aren't useful and cause harm. And so how do you solve these potentially insurmountable problems? You've got a generation that is more depressed than ever, more anxious than ever. And it's largely, a lot of it, I think, has to do with the standards they're trying to hold themselves to based on what they're seeing on their cell phones, and the interactions that they're having with folks on their cell phones. But then you don't have you're not willing to let them have access to something that might help them solve their problems because of suspicions about big pharma. So it's funny. It's no good deed goes unpunished when people try to address, come up with a solution for a problem. You always hear people say, "Oh, don't just give me the problems, give me the solution." When somebody comes up with a creative solution for a problem or an innovative solution for a problem, all of a sudden there are a lot of problems with the solution. So I feel like a lot of these arguments become circular.
Yeah, I think that's a problem on both sides of the debate, if you want to put it that way. So you're right. They talk about ionizing radiation and food dyes and pesticides and whatever, fertilizer. Like they talk about all these synthetic chemicals, these environmental exposures, PFAS, all this stuff that supposedly is harming children. They don't cite good evidence, as we talked about in our space. They don't back that up with good research. They back it up with junk epidemiology and ecological research. And, we poured red dye on a mouse for, right? We drowned them in red food dye and they
We
died.
injected it in his abdomen.
Yeah,
Right?
right. Yeah, and it didn't work out well. So, yeah, okay, fair enough. Don't inject your kids with red food dye. That's not a good thing. Now, if it's a little bit in their breakfast cereal, that's okay. That's not going to do anything. Just don't let them eat, 10 tons of breakfast cereal in a month, right? Just little moderation. I'm telling you, everyone just read Aristotle. He's the best public health scientist of all time. Just go read Aristotle's Ethics, and we can put all of this crap behind us. We don't have to deal with these dumb animal models. You just cultivate good habits. It's not easy, but if you do it, your life will be better. That's the key. Okay, all right. That's just an aside. Anyways, so people like Kennedy and this kind of alt health revolution, whatever you want to call it, they will identify a real problem and then turn the shotgun around and shoot themselves in the forehead, because then they identify a solution that's not a solution. It's a non-answer. For the tort lawyers, I think it's deliberate because they want to make money. Because you can't sue single parents for not preparing meals for their kids. That's not a moneymaker. You can sue whichever food company though, because they have lots of money. At least
That was able to provide a busy mom with a ready to eat meal for her hungry kid.
Those bastards. I knew it, right? Right? They hook you with the here's an affordable meal, and then they give your kid ADD. Way to go.
And so the solutions to this problem is to rearrange agriculture and make sure that agriculture is all not, the remedies that they have for agriculture are often not very productive. So if you are having less yield, that translates into higher food prices for said mom, who may or may not be able to afford all the fresh fruits and vegetables that you are recommending that she eats or her child eats.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent point. On the flip side, though, Team Science, as I like to refer to my own coalition, we have blinders on in a lot of ways too, because we'll identify real problems. Sometimes we'll ignore them entirely, but we'll identify real problems and then we will deliberately avoid the solutions because they make us feel yucky. So, for example, one thing I was happy to see in this report was talk about the impact of single parenthood on children. And I don't bring this up to slam anyone or insult anybody, but the research is pretty clear that kids fare much better when they grow up in a two-parent household. They're less likely to engage in criminal activity and drug use. They're less likely to experience mental health issues. These are critically important, right? A stable environment for a child is significant. But all of the people that spend all of their time blogging and tweeting and Instagramming about why vaccines are safe, which they are, or why this chemical doesn't cause cancer, they will not talk about any of these socioeconomic issues, because these are very awkward. Because if you start asking, why aren't people together? Why aren't people married? Why are they separating? Well, then you got to get into family dynamics. Are they getting married at all? You have to start maybe talking about the side effects of promiscuity. Now we're talking about people's individual choices, and we're talking about accountability at the individual level. And nobody likes that, right? The lawyers love to talk about corrupt companies. Lots of people in the alt health space will talk about government intervention, but no one wants to talk about this.
That's right.
Right. This needs to change, right? It doesn't mean you have to go on a crusade, but you do have to start looking at the research that's been done and talking publicly about it, because this is how you fix the problem.
And you can talk about it without being judgmental. You absolutely can. One of the things that I think is really under talked about is the importance of a dad in a family. Dads are critically important. They have a completely different relationship than moms do. Moms are sort of the nurturing caregivers and things like that. And I don't want to sound like I'm, off the reservation, but dads are really important in turning kids, I think, into outside people. They look outside of themselves. They do hard things. Women do hard things too, but men do things that are very underappreciated, but are very hard. I mean, people don't ever talk about the death gap between men's careers and women's careers, but I think that men instill a little bit more of a sense of adventure in their kids, and I think that that's a really important quality about parenting. It makes your kids, you get braver when you have brave men in your family. And I think it's really, really under recognized, and it's important.
Yeah, we are complementary.
Hmm.
That's how it works, you know? And just, you can think about it in evolutionary terms, right? You can't make a person without a man and a woman.
That's right.
And, there's an argument that follows from that also that goes back to Aristotle, interestingly enough, that parents have an obligation to raise their children, right? In order to function as they're supposed to in the world, as you were just saying in relation to fathers, right? They need to be taught certain lessons. They need, in the mother's case, right? You need to literally nourish your child for the first couple of years of their life. And then, you know what I mean? So these are really important topics, but they tend to get relegated to these partisan political conflicts because there's this kind of dogma where we're non-judgmental, and that's the bottom line, right? So because we have to be non-judgmental, we can only talk about certain topics, right? Why are so few people getting married in the first place? Well, I don't know. They just don't want to. Who are you to judge, right? And we end up in a situation like this. So the report doesn't go into nearly as much detail as I would have liked, but they actually mention it. So hopefully this will open the door to a wider discussion that we can have. Same thing with social media. I don't know if it's that a lot of people in the sciences, just speculating here, I suspect a lot of people that are talking about vaccines and chemicals, a lot of them don't have children. And so the impacts of social media on children, there's really no personal incentive for them. And you don't get gold star brownie points from Team Vaccine for talking about young girls being poisoned by Instagram advertising, right? You don't get lots of retweets, right? If you smash RFK about his anti-vaccine rhetoric, you get lots of high fives for that. But the incentive is different for some of these other issues.
That's exactly right. And so, I think that's unfortunate. People are operating on trying to get as many clicks as possible. So it's a problem.
That said, there were some things in this document that I found deeply troubling. One of the things that drives me up the wall, again, as a dad, is this obsession with attacking ultra-processed food, which is not a thing. It's not a real designation, right? If you use a ruler and you measure an inch, it's an inch no matter where you are in the world. It's just a metric that makes sense. Ultra-processed food is a subjective, nebulous kind of a standard. No one agrees on it, which they acknowledge in the report. Interestingly, they say there's no universal definition of ultra processing. Nevertheless, here's all these conflicting studies that we want you to not read, right? Just, it's a footnote, it's there, but just believe what we're telling you. And this is the problem. So, and we talked about this on our space, but the one point I'll make is the centerpiece of their case against ultra processed food is that it is engineered to make you keep eating it, right? As opposed to other products in the world, right? The makers don't want you to use the product, so they make it as lousy as possible, right? Of course, that's not the way it works. Anyways, the idea is, a Dorito, which is I don't know why that's my go-to example, right? But it's like, it's chemically engineered, so you keep eating them and you just can't stop. The centerpiece piece of data is a study from 2019 that was done by Kevin Hall at the National Institutes of Health. They put 20 people on a diet consisting of mostly ultra-processed food. And then after 2 weeks, they switched them to a completely unprocessed diet. And what they found is that over the 2-week period, people lost 2 pounds and they ate just naturally on their own 500 fewer calories. And once the study was published, it became the gospel truth that ultra-processed food is slowly killing your children. Now, what no one says, including the authors of this report, as they cited it, is that Kevin Hall has come out, I think it was in 2022, and he said, I oversold this. I actually don't think it's processing, and the reason I think that is the whole time I've been doing this work, I've been eating lots of ultra-processed food, and I'm healthy, and I'm not gaining weight, and the reason is because I'm making deliberate choices. So I'm still eating highly processed food that's good for me. It has all the vitamins and nutrients I need. And what he took away from that is maybe I need to focus on palatability, which I still think is kind of stupid and it sidesteps the real issue. But nevertheless, to his credit, he said, I did this study. I have changed my mind. And nobody talks about this. They want to cite the research, but they won't tell you that the guy actually doesn't think it's a thing anymore.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I also think that I do think that we consume too much sugar. And I think that that is part of the problem. And I think if we've gone from Coca-Cola bottles being, small to, big 24-ounce Coca-Colas, I don't think that the underlying sugar itself is the problem. I think that, sugar is crucial to our diets, right? We break our carbohydrates down to the simplest sugar, glucose, and we can't live without glucose. So so I think that the claims about sugar are overstated, but I don't think it's addictive. I don't think it's, I think it is very palatable. I think that the claims about sugar substitutes then are also overblown. A solution for people with diabetes or a solution for people who want to diet, aspartame and things like that are always under constant attack, even though they are trying to address the problem of obesity and the problem of diabetes in a way that is beneficial for people. So once again, sugar is an important part of your diet. Over consuming sugar is what's causing obesity and can lead to type 2 diabetes and other problems. I don't think that it's addictive. I think that claim is overblown. And I think that the people who've come up with solutions for sugar and too much sugar in the diet are being unfairly targeted too, with disinformation coming from the same groups of people who are making these other claims.
I have a mandarin tree in my backyard. It's one of my greatest creations. I'm very proud of it because my wife and I bought our house and planted this 5 years ago, whatever. And now it's massive and it yields a ton of fruit each year. These mandarins, they are so freaking delicious. You pull them off the tree, you peel them. You can do it with your thumbs because it's that simple. They're sweet, they're soft, and I can knock back, if I'm not careful, 5 or 6 of those in 20 minutes. I really can. It's very easy. There is nothing processed or GMO'd or anything. I think I've used an insecticide treatment like twice since the tree's been here to kill the bugs that would try to eat the fruit. That's it. There's nothing. It's like the most natural from God food that any of these people would approve of. And if I did that every day, I would gain a ton of weight. It's very easy because there are things, and this is an evolutionary kind of a thing, right? The things that have the nutrients you need taste good because that's how you know to eat them, right? There's a reason dirt tastes bad and mandarins taste awesome.
That's exactly right.
Same thing with
biology.
Yes. Trust the science. Another one of my favorite snacks is raw almonds. That's as unprocessed as it gets. They harvest them off the tree, they put them in a bag, and they show up in my grocery store. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's, in terms of processing, there's not that much that goes on. Those are calorific. And if you're not careful, you can eat 1,000 calories worth of almonds very, very casually. And there's plenty of fiber. There's plenty of protein. So all of these stupid arguments about, well, the chips don't have fiber and protein and that's why you overeat them. That's bullshit. It's not real. Okay. So my point is you can eat as much natural food as you want and you can overconsume it and sit on your couch and watch Netflix. It's very easy to do. So we are totally off the mark here. There's no way this is going to solve the problem because you have to teach people how to cultivate good habits, and no one again is focusing on that.
Yes, nobody, and then people get into environmental stuff all the time too. I mean, almond trees take a lot of water. Fruit trees take a lot of water. It's important to do all that and have access to this stuff, but they require maintenance and they require some TLC. And sometimes, according to the environmentalists, the things that you do to maintain the outputs from these agricultural products are not environmentally friendly. And I think that once again, those are overstated claims.
They're not just overstated, at least in California. They're complete and utter lies. The reason that you hear that argument, the reason it gets repeated in the media is because we have artificial scarcity on the West Coast in California. We get plenty of rain, all the claims about climate change aside, we get plenty of rain most years, and a lot of it is allowed to wash out into the ocean for delta outflows because there's these arguments about ecology and the balance of nutrients in the water, and there's, this species of kelp, and then there's this species of guppy, and we've got to maintain salinity in the water, blah, blah, blah. There's some truth to that, but you have to eliminate huge uh, amounts of water that we collect, right? They let it wash out. You're not allowed to build desalination plants. The arguments go on. I don't mean to belabor it, but all of these claims are junk, right? They create a system where there isn't enough water to go around, and then they go, "There's not enough water, so you can't grow." It's like, well, that's dumb.
Well, and then the whole topic of wildfire that we talked about a little bit earlier as well. I mean, they let invasive species of plants go wild because they're too afraid of chemistry to control those invasive species, and those invasive species of weeds are kindling for wildfire. And then you get the knock-on effects of particulate matter and volatile organic compounds and all of the stuff that people are talking about, dioxins, all of that stuff from wildfires. And people are like so paralyzed by the fear of chemicals or solutions that could prevent these problems that they wind up with bigger problems. And it's time to have a reasonable conversation that may not just be science oriented, but these are the benefits of these products that are out there. And you're not hearing about the benefits. You're hearing about the overblown claims that these trace exposures to things that demonstrably make your life better, make your food supply safer, make your medical care safer and better. These overblown claims that there's going to be harm from these kinds of exposures. I mean, the whole discussion about plastics and microplastics. I find that very frustrating because, and I've been looking at a lot of the literature on microplastics at the moment and plastic at the moment because I sit on an EPA committee. And the claims that are being made in the literature.
My condolences, by the way.
The claims being made in the literature, if you look at the abstract of the articles and you look at their conclusions, and then you look at the data in between, the data don't match up with the claims in the abstract and the conclusions. And when there's an article by Scharch et al. That came out, I want to say in 2024. And it is a huge meta-analysis. Well, they tried to do a meta-analysis and they couldn't do a meta-analysis because they couldn't find any evidence of human health issues. So then they tried to do an analysis of animal health data and couldn't find a whole lot on that. And what they came down with is there's really no evidence in the literature that supports the claim of poisoning people or animals in the plastic literature. I think there's a very reasonable claim that there's plastic pollution in the ocean, and we need to make sure that we clean it up. I think there's a very reasonable claim that kids are exposed to poor kids in developing countries are being exposed to e-waste, and when they're trying to do recycling, they're exposed to nitric acid, they're exposed to cadmium when they're trying to harvest gold and platinum and things from e-waste. That stuff really needs to be looked after and managed. But to go and say your kid is being poisoned by PVC in his toys, that's just not the case. To go and claim after decades of independent research have demonstrated otherwise, that BPA is going to cause endocrine disruption in your children, it's just not going to do that. And so these big claims are not holding up, and the literature that people are using to support their claims directly contradicts what they're saying. And one of the claims that they have in here is, let me just see if I can pull it up, but one of the claims that they're making about microplastics, if I can find it.
Yeah, while you're finding it, just a more general observation is that there were multiple instances that we went over where they would make a claim in the report and we would check the footnote, and the footnote said the exact opposite. Not like, oh, they misquoted it. No, no, no. It literally contradicts what the report says.
That's exactly right. So they have an article on microplastics by Rahman et al. Rahman. And quote, first of all, it's a review article. This is not original research. So these are, most of the articles that they've cited for a lot of their claims are review articles. Quote, the reviewed articles did not demonstrate any direct evidence of human health risk due to exposures to microplastics. So if you're going to make the claim that microplastics are harming people, you might want to have the research to back up that claim. But the research that I have evaluated, including research that has come from UCSF, which is the Sharch article that I just talked about, did not demonstrate that there is an association between plastic exposure, whether it's the polymer or the monomer, and real impact on children's health. It just does not make that. You can't make that claim because not even the association is there.
One of the other examples, and after this, let's move on to the industry capture nonsense because that had my blood boiling. One of the other examples, this is reference 259 in the MAHA Commission Report, so you guys can look this up. That they make the claim that every sample of breast milk in the United States, presumably from the studies they looked at, is contaminated with some level of pollutant, including pesticides. This is a garbage claim that we've debunked. Lots of people have debunked. There's been good research on this. There's nothing in breast milk that's going to harm your children, unless you're doing heroin or something, or okay, if you're just living a normal life and you're trying to maintain good habits, breast milk is not going to poison your kid. That's stupid. Okay, that's the first thing. But they make this claim, but if you go to the reference, you don't even have to read past the abstract. The very bottom of the abstract says, these results should not be interpreted as evidence to discourage women from breastfeeding or an indication of any harm. We do need better data. We need to monitor this going forward. That's all it says. Now, the report itself doesn't come out and say that there's poisons in breast milk and you should be scared, but they lead you to that conclusion and then they stop. So the implication for policymakers or for the public or for journalists who are reading this report is this is something concerning. And the logical inference is going to be because there's pesticides in breast milk. But the reference doesn't support that. The literature doesn't support that. And so for all this talk, and I've been mostly positive towards Jay Bhattacharya because I liked a lot of the things he said during the pandemic, and I think he's a pretty good economist and scientist. But that is unexcusable, right? They had enough people on this panel who should have looked at that and went, we can't make that claim. We need to reword this. So there's lots of that. So if you read this, check the footnotes to be sure that
yes. For example, in the glyphosate, in full disclosure, I work for Bayer. In the glyphosate, they have 5 citations that they use to make the claim that glyphosate is associated with a range of possible. They don't even say definite. They've made much broader claims in the literature and in the lay press. But when they came to this, they walked it back a little bit. They said a selection of research studies on glyphosate have noted a range of possible health effects, right? So which is not how that is presented in court or to the press or to the lay public. 2 of the studies that they cited did not support claims of impact on human health. So they directly contradicted what they say. So in one of them, the authors say that glyphosate was not associated with negative impacts on child development, neurodevelopment. And the other one said that glyphosate in the urine is not associated with any health outcome. But they're extrapolating that what these studies claim to show and then don't actually come to the right conclusion. And so that's misleading to people.
Yeah. Just look, this is good advice. If you're reading a news article, if you're reading an academic paper, if you're listening to a 30-second video on TikTok, whatever, check their sources. And you'll find, I would love to do a study and put a percentage on this, but I would say maybe half the time you will find that there's exaggeration or just outright fabrication. And that I'm not cutting academics out of that. I mean, major medical journals do this all the
Yes.
time.
Yes, I do.
And with our last few minutes here, let's focus on that. So the report spends a lot of time complaining about industry capture of regulatory agencies. So they say over and over again that the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, they spend billions of dollars on lobbying each year, and they have undue influence over the FDA and other regulatory agencies. And again, by implication, the information that is coming out of these agencies is not reliable because it's effectively paid for by pharmaceutical companies or whoever the bad guy of the day is, right? It's a food company, it's a pharma company, it's a pesticide, whatever. Big bad company buys agency is the headline. The problem with it, there's myriad problems, but one of the problems with this, as we've talked about before, is that the vast majority of drugs that enter the development pipeline don't make it to the FDA review process, right? It's like 12%, as we've said. So if these companies own the FDA, why are they doing that? Wouldn't the vast majority of their drugs get FDA approval, right? Like the process, if it's owned, why is it like that? Why do they have to spend however many billions of dollars it is in 10 years developing a drug? Why do they have to prove that their study methodology is sound to independent auditors? Why would they do that? If they own the process, there's only a relatively small handful of big pharma companies. Surely they could just own this entire thing, right? That doesn't make any sense. Make it make sense, Liza.
So one of the things that you hear is that pharma is at the root of who pays for the FDA. So pharma pays for the FDA, and that's why they buy. The claim is that they buy scientists so they can get fast approvals. Well, where that comes from is, once again, no good deed goes unpunished. In the 80s and 90s, early 90s, there was a huge push from organizations and activists, organizations like ACT UP and other HIV activists and advocates, because young people were dying of this horrible disease that only had one treatment, which was AZT. And there was a big push on the regulatory agencies to start expediting the development of drugs to prevent these young people from dying. And so what the pharmaceutical companies did is they pooled together money so that FDA could hire more scientists to be able to expedite the approval process. And that's not in order to get their own drug that they're developing approved more quickly. It's actually to help expedite the process just in general. There are not enough regulatory scientists. A lot of people think that working in organizations like the FDA and the EPA is very dull, because you have to look at study after study after study in great depth in order to be able to decide whether or not something is safe enough to go on the market. And so I think that the notion that there is regulatory capture is very unfortunate, and it's it's detrimental for the credibility of the regulatory scientists who are out there trying to do the very best job that they can. Undermining that, it makes that job thankless. There's another discussion about revolving doors. Well, there are not enough regulatory scientists out there, right? And since there are not enough regulatory scientists out there, it's so much so that pharma had to help the agencies hire them in terms of giving them enough funding to hire them. There's not enough expertise then to adequately evaluate things. And so often you will have a person who's an expert in a regulatory agency will come work for industry, and that person will advise industry on the things that they need to do to make sure that their products are being approved. They've got that expertise. They know how to do it. They know the tests that the industry needs to do. It's really important for small biotech startups not to do testing that's going to cost them a whole lot of money and then not be able to use those tests, right? It's important for people with that expertise to be able to work in companies and vice versa. The companies know all about how something is developed, and so they can help advise the regulatory agencies on the most efficient way to regulate drugs. There's a symbiosis there that is not necessarily to the benefit of a with a for-profit motive. That's what I'm getting at, and they won't necessarily get their drugs approved.
It's critical that people understand this. And I don't mean to sound smarmy when I say that, but this is really pivotal. So, we live in a highly technical society that's global. And the way that we keep things running is we have highly technical experts that run and manage all of the systems that we rely on, like the power grid. Or in the case of pharmaceuticals, right? You need pharmaceutical chemists that have a very, very specific expertise that know how to make those drugs. And then you have to have toxicologists who are a different kind of expert, like Liza, who can review the safety, right? And then you need people who are experts on designing clinical trials. And then you need people who know how to market those drugs. And then you need to and then you need people that can mass manufacture, right? There's a whole distribution development chain that requires different types of expertise all coordinated and working together. If you're a regulatory agency, what do you need to make sure that process is being run safely and legally and ethically? Well, you need the same kind of people with the same expertise, right? So I get why the revolving door thing scares people. And sometimes, as we've talked about, there are cases of malfeasance that should be harshly punished. Neither of us deny that. But the point is that if you have a problem with the way the pharmaceutical regulatory industry space runs, you have a problem with a globalized world that is driven by technology, because it doesn't work otherwise, because you have this division of labor and you have this division of expertise. And so the problem, what I'm getting at is the problem is much bigger, right? The problem is we have this sort of totalizing system that we live under. And that's really the threat. If you think what this specific example from pharma is, that's the problem, right? So you need to think more globally or more holistically about this.
And if you are a researcher, and because this accusation doesn't just come from ordinary people, it also comes from academics. And if you are a researcher and you have come up with a brilliant idea that you want to get off the shelf, you and your university don't have $1 billion to do all the testing that you yourself are demanding get done by pharmaceutical companies on every single drug that is on the market, right? Plus, you want not only so those tests take 10 to 15 years to do, and they cost $1 billion per product, right? And people complain that pharmaceutical companies are paying for the studies, but who's supposed to pay for the studies? Do you want should the taxpayers pay for the studies? No, you can't get innovation that way, right? And it's not fair to the taxpayers because so many of the things fail. So if you're got 15 compounds and only one's going to make it through the pipeline, you're talking about a huge expense for taxpayers. So that's if a company is going to recoup the money that it spent on making drugs, it needs to do that. Yes, I do think also that there is validity to the claim that the United States of America has been, financing the R&D for drugs for globally, and I think that maybe that needs to shift a little bit. But it's not accurate to say that that you can get your product off the laboratory shelf out into the market without this intervention thing. The other thing is, do you really want all of your medications to be supplements that people are hawking on social media? I keep on seeing, the claim that nattokinase is this miracle drug that's going to cure whatever ails you and is the perfect detox for COVID-19 spike protein and detoxing from the vaccine. These are all these claims that they're making about it. Well, nattokinase is also, according to them, a thrombolytic. And thrombolytics break up blood clots. And so one of the side effects of thrombolytics is that if you don't use them properly, or one of the adverse reactions that's well known and documented, is you can have brain bleeds. Well, I personally would like to see a double-blind, randomized, controlled, placebo-controlled study on nattokinase. Those people should have, those supplements should have to go through the same requirements that if they're going to make this claim, they need to have the same testing that RFK Jr. is asking for vaccines. And then we can talk about it to determine safety.
You posted this. I don't know if it was someone that makes that supplement or someone that was just promoting it. You posted that under their post and then retweeted it. And they deleted. I have never seen someone delete a tweet so quickly, because they don't want to have that conversation. And that's very revealing, right? They'll go on and on for days and days about placebo-controlled 80-year-long studies on vaccines and why your kids are at risk from untested vaccines. But then they'll sell you the supplement. They have no idea what it does. And in many cases, they don't even know what's in it, because they're outsourcing the manufacturing and they're drop shipping it to you from China. So
that's exactly right.
Anyways, that's very important. A final point as we wrap up here that I want to make. I actually laughed out loud as I was reading the report. This is a direct quote that I'm reading here. So they write, one of the world's most prestigious journals, the British Medical Journal is what they're talking about, published an article critiquing pharmaceutical advertisements and lost an estimated $1.5 million in advertising revenue, revealing, direct quote from that investigation, the true colors of the pharmaceutical industry, which was willing to flex its considerable muscle when it felt its interests were threatened. Okay, let me walk everybody through what an absurdity this quote is. This article in the British Medical Journal, which on balance is a good journal, I think, this article is complaining about the nefarious influence of pharmaceutical advertising, right? In response, the pharmaceutical industry said, I guess we should pull our advertising from your journal. After all, we don't want to be a negative influence. Did BMJ say, thank you so much? Thank you. We're willing to stand by our principles here. No. What did they do? They complained that their ad revenue got pulled. Do you see the scam this is, everybody?
Because big pharma.
Right.
You can't win for losing.
Right.
If you're a company, you can't win for losing.
If you advertise your products legally and in compliance with the U.S. Constitution and other federal laws, you're a bad guy because you're selling your products to people who don't need them. Okay, I'll pull my... No, don't pull your advertising from us. We need your money. We need your money, pharma. So, do you see how this works? Make the drugs, make them safe and effective. Don't charge too much. Don't say anything in public. Don't say anything to the government unless we give you explicit permission. It's like, what planet do you live on when you can be this crusading journalist or a Netflix producer where you can tell these disingenuous, dishonest stories and then take money from pharma for it? Are you kidding me? Get out of here. Whew. My goodness. That's a direct quote from the MAHA report, right?
It's insane.
I don't know, so it's like pharma's bad when they spend their money on ads unless they're giving the money to me. Then it's okay.
It's insane. It's insane.
Oh, go ahead. I don't mean to cut you
No,
off.
no. That's it.
Okay. A related example, this is not in the report, but Netflix put out a show last year called Painkiller. It's a mini-series about the opioid epidemic, and it's just chock full of lies and dishonesty and deception. It was infuriating. After I watched that one, I watched Dope Sick, which is like a similar show on Hulu, which is ABC Disney's streaming service. I could not make it through 5 to 10 minutes of that show without seeing a pharmaceutical ad. So this whole series is about the evils of Purdue Pharma, and they're forcing these opioids on people, and they're lying about the abuse liability. They're addictive, and they're lying about it. Let's break for a Viagra commercial. I can't take this seriously. You can't allege this corporate pharma conspiracy to poison the country and then run your TV network on pharma advertising. I can't. It's just shameless. I couldn't sleep if that's how I funded my work.
I think that, it's once again, I don't even know how companies can try to defend themselves. I feel like, the companies have such a critical role in society, and I think that people don't understand that they hire people they to do a job that pay, and those people are then able to produce things that other people want to buy, and improves their lives, and they those people who are working for that company then can pay taxes to pay for the goods and services that are perceived to be necessary: education, roads, tornado relief, all that stuff, right? And if you, in the end, the companies are regulated. And so if you really want to make American manufacturing and American business great again, we got to figure out this narrative, because it seems like it's very difficult. If you want to bring back jobs to the United States, you got to make sure that those companies are going to be relatively protected. I'm not saying protected from lawsuits that are valid, but protected from the junk science that is currently undermining really good companies that make really important products that make your life better.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get sued for a product that is, over 50 years old and has decades of research establishing safety, nobody's going to want to innovate here.
Yeah. So two takeaways for me from this report. As I said, there's a lot of good in there. Not as much as there should be, but there are some good observations in there that I'm willing to give them credit for, because they're talking about things that are important. Nevertheless, if you're concerned about public health, if you're concerned about obesity, start with you. Start with your kids. Are you part of a local church? Talk about it there. Start a group where you work with parents, right? Because that's a thing local churches do. Start a community group. If you want kids to exercise more, go be a little league coach. Like, start at the level, at the community level, and do things that will make a difference. And you're not going to affect 100,000 people, but if you can help 5 kids develop good habits, that's going to impact the way that they go on to live their lives. If you think pharmaceutical drugs are bad, then don't take them. Don't take them. The only time you'll be forced to take a pharmaceutical drug is when the government illegally tries to force it on you. And that's usually in the case of a vaccine, okay? No one's gonna force you. So if you don't want to take a statin, or you don't want to take blood pressure medication, whatever, then don't. No one's gonna make you. You can't. They're not that easy to get. This is the other thing that blows my mind. It's like, okay, you see an advertisement. Well, what do you do if you want the drug? You have to schedule an appointment with your doctor, and then you have to convince them to write you a prescription, which is increasingly.
And then the insurance company's like, no,
right.
you can't have it because I said you can't have it.
Right. So in other words, take steps, and I don't mean to sound super angry here, but you have to cultivate good habits, right? If you don't want to be fat, then you have to eat better and exercise. If whatever diet works for you, that's great. You just have to eat less food. That's just the bottom line. If you want to be stronger, if you don't want to be frail and have a broken back, you have to go work out. And you know what I mean? This is just life. This is just the human condition. If you want to be a musician, you got to sit down and practice your scales. If you want to be a great athlete, you have to put in the time. That's all there is to it. It's like eliminating food dyes, suing any company. It's just not going to fix the problems. You're barking up the wrong tree. Final thought, and then whatever you have to add, Liza. If we, as a country, if we follow these MAHA true believers, the Means twins and Kennedy, if we follow these people, there are going to be very bad consequences. And the only thing I can say is, you reap what you sow. I don't want this to be true. I don't want, I want to live a normal life. I don't want to have to deal with this. But if you vote for people that are going to give these people authority, I don't want to bring up the H.L. Mencken quote, but it's let me just read it. What the hell? H.L. Mencken: democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it, good and hard. That's what's on the menu. If these people get their way, there's going to be less food on your shelves. Like food's going to be more expensive. Medicine's going to be more expensive. Everything that you rely on for your standard of living is going to be harder to get. And they won't take any blame. They will benefit from it, and then they will shirk the responsibility, and then they'll finger someone else as the culprit, and you will be worse off for it. They don't care about you.
And I think that people underestimate that. People like, I think a lot of the scientists out there are like, oh, the science will prevail, and they're busy doing their work, but they aren't standing up to this disinformation that really could impact people. It only takes one person. If you look at the impact that Trofim Lysenko had on Soviet and Chinese agriculture, and what the impact of poor agricultural practices had on Sri Lanka, that should give you an evidence-based idea of what happens with bad decision making about critical parts of your life that we've taken for granted. So read about Trofim Lysenko, the deadliest scientist of the 20th century, and let's make a decision that we're not going to go repeat those mistakes.
Very good. We'll leave it there. Everyone, have a pleasant week, despite all of this, this onslaught of frustration and criticism that we have to deal with. Thank you for joining us. Follow us on X. It's at Dr. Liza MD. I'm at Cam J English. The spaces are every Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time. We'd love to see you. We talk about this and more. You can speak your mind. You can disagree with us. Lots of people do. We get lots of color commentary. It's great. And with that, we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.